The highway stretched like a vein of black glass under the moonlight, endless and hollow. No cars ahead, none behind. Just the hum of tires against asphalt and the low drone of the engine. Then, headlights. They weren't there a moment ago. In the rearview mirror, two pale beams flickered into existence, impossibly close. Too close. The driver's hand tightened on the wheel. He slowed. The lights slowed with him. He sped up. They stayed. A whisper of wind slipped through the crack of his window. For a moment, he thought he heard it. A scream stretched thin, as if carried for miles across the dark. He pulled over. Gravel crunched under the tires. The other car should have passed. But when he looked up, the lights were gone. Silence pressed in. The night seemed too still, too heavy, and then he saw it. A figure stood by the roadside, just beyond the reach of his headlights, thin, motionless, its face pale as bone, eyes catching the light like glass marbles. The driver froze. His breath fogged the glass. The figure lifted an arm, slow, deliberate, waving. The lights behind him blinked back on. Only this time, there was no car to hold them, the driver whispered, voice trembling into the dark. Not again. He had driven this stretch of road more times than he cared to remember, but never after midnight. That was a rule, one he swore by. Tonight, though, the schedule had slipped. Too many hours wasted at the depot, too many deliveries stacked back to back. By the time his truck rolled onto the black ribbon of Highway 47, the clock on the dash read 12:17 a.m. The highway was different at night. In the day, it was just empty. Fields, rusting billboards, the occasional gas station where the coffee burned your tongue and the clerk didn't bother to look up. At night, though, it carried weight, the kind that pressed on your chest, the kind that made every mile feel like it was pulling you deeper into something you couldn't crawl back out of. His name was Earl Mathers, 42, long-haul driver for over 2 decades. He wasn't superstitious. He wasn't easily rattled, but he'd heard enough about this road to respect its reputation. Disappearances, cars found abandoned with doors wide open, engines still warm. Truckers who signed off on their radios and were never heard from again. Locals muttered about hitchhikers that weren't alive and screams that didn't come from people. All nonsense, he told himself. Stories to spook rookies, except every story comes from somewhere. The cab smelled of black coffee and sweat. His eyes burned from fatigue, but he kept them locked on the horizon. Just keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look back. A phrase rattled in his skull, something the gas station clerk had said 2 towns back, when Earl had filled up his last tank before the long run. The kid had leaned over the counter, his voice low, eyes darting like a man afraid of being overheard. If you hear them, he'd whispered, don't answer. Earl had chuckled at the time, sliding bills across the counter. Just another small-town superstition. But now, with the cab filled by the sound of nothing but engine drone and his own breathing, the words sat heavier. A shape broke the horizon. At first, he thought it was nothing, just another dead sign leaning into the ditch. But as his headlights carved through the dark, he saw it was a car, a sedan. Hood up, hazards blinking like frantic eyes. Someone was waving, a woman. She stood in the middle of the road, arms slashing the air, her figure jerking with desperation. Earl's knuckles whitened on the wheel. His chest tightened. Not again, he checked his mirrors. Nothing behind him. The empty highway stretched both ways, endless, starless. He slowed. The truck hissed as it bled speed. The woman's face came into view, long hair clinging to her cheeks, pale skin sickly under the strobing hazards. She was mouthing something. He couldn't hear it through the glass, but her lips formed the same word again and again. Please. Earl swallowed hard. His rule was simple, never stop at night. But rules bend when you see someone stranded, don't they? He knew the stories. He knew what they said about figures on this road after midnight. Still, what if she was real? What if she'd been standing here for hours, and he was the only one who could help? The truck crept closer. The woman's face shifted in the light, and something wasn't right. Her mouth kept moving, but not in rhythm. The word please didn't line up with the shapes her lips made. They were out of sync, like a film reel and audio running on separate machines. Earl's foot hovered over the brake. Her eyes snapped to his. Not the kind of eye contact you expect from someone begging for help. Not hopeful, not afraid. Something else, like she was measuring him. Waiting. A cold prickle spread down his arms. No, he muttered under his breath. and pushed the accelerator. The truck roared past, headlights slicing across her figure. For the briefest instant, he saw her clearly, skin too pale, joints bent at odd angles, a grin tugging at the corners of her mouth as though she were seconds from laughing. Then she was gone. Just gone. Earl's heart hammered in his throat. He dared a glance at the mirror. Empty road. No woman, no car, no blinking hazards, only darkness. His hands trembled against the wheel. The radio crackled to life, a hiss of static crawling into the silence. Then, beneath the static, something faint. A voice. Please. The same voice. The same broken rhythm. Earl reached for the dial with a shaky hand, twisting it hard until the radio went dead. His breathing came ragged now, his body buzzing with fear he didn't want to name. Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't listen. The road ahead stretched on forever, an endless throat swallowing him whole. Somewhere in the distance, just beyond the reach of his high beams, he thought he saw another pair of lights blinking. Another stranded car. Another figure waving. Earl gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles burned. The gas station clerk's words echoed in his head again. If you hear them, don't answer. The miles crawled by, but Earl felt no closer to anything. Just the same black ribbon of road, the same suffocating dark pressing in on both sides. His headlights lit up the white stripes ahead, mile after mile, until he felt dizzy, hypnotized. He forced himself to blink, once, twice, every time his eyes closed. He saw her face, the woman in the road, her lips jerking. The words spilling out of sync. Please. He shook his head hard and muttered, She wasn't there. She wasn't. Truck stop coffee messing with me. Long shift, that's all. But his hands didn't believe the words. They gripped the wheel so tight his fingertips had gone numb. The CB radio crackled again. Static rolled in slow waves, then broke apart, shaping sound. Eastbound. You hearing this? The voice was thin, tinny. Another driver, maybe. Copy? Earl grabbed the mic, forcing calm into his tone. Breaker, this is Redhound out of Memphis. Got ears? Silence. Then, breathing, heavy, close, a man's voice whispering. Don't stop. Earl's throat went dry. Say again. You're breaking up. The radio cut off with a squeal sharp enough to sting his ears. He set the mic down with shaking fingers. Hell with this. The highway wasn't empty anymore. First, it was just the sound, something scraping lightly against the side of the trailer, like fingernails dragging across metal. Earl's blood ran cold. He stared straight ahead, refusing to check the mirrors. Then the shadows began to move. In the corner of his vision, figures loped along the roadside, just outside the edge of his lights. At first he thought it was tricks of the eyes, trees bending in the wind. But the highway had no trees here, just open land, flat and barren. Nothing to cast shadows. He clenched his jaw. Keep driving. Don't stop. The stories came back in fragments, half-remembered warnings from diners and fuel stops years ago. The boy from Amarillo. Saw her once. White dress. Never should have slowed down. The old man with the beard like twisted rope. You pass him the first time, you think it's luck. The second time, you realize you're stuck. The woman at the diner. They're not lost. They're looking for company. Back then, he'd laughed them off. He wasn't laughing now. Another 30 minutes, maybe more. Time felt melted. Earl's eyes caught movement up ahead. Another car. A rusted pickup parked at an angle across the shoulder, headlights cutting into the weeds. Someone stood by it. Not a woman this time. A man, broad-shouldered, wearing a trucker's cap low over his face. His thumb jerked out in a hitchhiker's pose. Not tonight, Earl muttered, pressing down on the accelerator. The man didn't move, didn't shift, didn't flinch as the 18-wheeler roared closer. His head turned at the last second, snapping toward the cab. His face was pale as chalk, his mouth open in a scream Earl couldn't hear, and then gone. Truck passed the spot in a heartbeat. The shoulder was empty. Earl's pulse pounded in his ears. The radio hissed. A different voice this time, cracked and raw. You saw him too, huh? Earl's blood froze. He grabbed the mic. Who is this? Static swallowed the reply. But buried inside it, faint as a breath. They never leave. They wait. They wait for you. The road twisted, carrying him past an old rest stop that hadn't been in service for years. The neon sign still clung to life, buzzing faint red letters. Eat. Half the bulbs burned out, so it read only, "At." The diner sat like a corpse, windows boarded, but through the gaps Earl saw light. Not flickering, not random, steady. A warm yellow glow, the kind of glow that promised coffee and eggs at 3 in the morning. He slowed without realizing. His body yearned for it, the comfort of a place where things made sense, where people were still alive. Then a sound cut through the drone of his engine. Laughter, high-pitched, childlike. It bubbled out of the radio, echoing in the cab. His foot slammed back on the accelerator. The diner vanished in the rear view, light snuffed as if it never burned at all. Sleep was becoming a threat. He rubbed his eyes, fighting the heaviness, and when he opened them, his stomach turned. The gauges on his dash were wrong. Fuel needle jittered, bouncing between full and empty. Odometer numbers flickered, flipping digits faster than the wheels could carry. The clock rolled backward. Not happening, he whispered, voice cracking. Not real, but the road wasn't obeying time anymore. The same faded billboard passed by 3 times, an ad for a motel that had shut down years ago. Every time it reappeared, the paint was fresher, the colors brighter, until the 3rd pass when it looked brand new. He couldn't tell if he was going forward or backward. The voices returned, whispered at first, overlapping. Men, women, children, too many to count, fading in and out with the static. Help me. A cold. Where are we? Earl slammed the radio off. The whispers didn't stop. They were inside the cab now, seeping out of the air vents, curling through the thin crack of his window. His knuckles bled from gripping the wheel. He realized he'd bitten his lip raw, copper taste filling his mouth. Up ahead, a set of headlights appeared. Another trucker. Relief punched through his fear. Someone real. Someone alive. The rig approached, horn blaring as it passed. Earl caught a glimpse through the windshield. The driver looked exactly like him. Same face. Same hat. Same expression twisted in panic. And behind that Earl, in the passenger seat, sat the woman from before, smiling wide, her lips still moving out of sync. The rig was gone in a heartbeat, swallowed by the dark. Earl's chest heaved, sweat soaking his shirt. He whispered a prayer, though he hadn't prayed in 20 years. God help me, please, the CB answered in a voice that wasn't his own. No one can. The night dragged on, endless, circling. Earl lost track of how many times he saw her, the woman, the man, the faces blurred by glass. They appeared at gas stations that hadn't existed in decades, at diners glowing with phantom light, on the roadside with their hands outstretched. He wanted to scream, to stop, to tear the wheel from its bolts and run. But his body moved on its own, locked to the road, as if the truck wasn't his anymore. Each mile he felt the world thinning. The stars blinked out one by one. The air grew heavier, and the whispers. Oh, the whispers never stopped. At last a shape loomed on the horizon, a diner. Not abandoned this time. Real. Neon lights buzzing, parking lot full of cars, music leaking through the cracked door. A figure stood outside, waving him in, her, the woman. Again, only this time. She wasn't mouthing please. Her lips formed 2 new words, perfectly in sync with her voice as it crawled through the radio, smooth as silk. Welcome back. The diner's neon buzzed like a dying insect. Diner in red, with the eye flickering off and on, turning the word into Diener every few seconds. The parking lot brimmed with cars that looked wrong, too clean, too polished, some with plates decades out of date. Earl slowed the truck. His foot pressed the brake, though his mind screamed, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." The rig hissed to a halt. The woman waited by the door, same pale skin, same hair clinging to her face. But she wasn't waving now. She was smiling, a patient smile as if she'd been waiting for him all along. Earl's heart hammered. His hand reached for the ignition key. He could turn, drive, break through the grip of whatever this was. But when he twisted the key, nothing happened. The engine coughed and died, dashboard lights dimming until only the clock remained, stuck at 12:17 a.m. He forced himself to breathe. "You're tired, just tired." But the woman was still there, still smiling, and then she lifted her hand, not to wave, to beckon. Earl's body moved before his mind agreed. His boots hit gravel, cold air stabbing his lungs. The moment his feet touched the ground, The highway behind him dissolved. No trucks, no lanes, just blackness stretching into forever. The diner door swung open on its own. Light spilled across the lot, warm and golden, smelling of coffee and bacon. For a moment, Earl almost cried with relief. A normal place. A safe place. He stepped inside. The diner hummed with life. Every booth was filled. Families eating pancakes, truckers hunched over steaming mugs, kids scribbling on placemats. The jukebox in the corner rattled out an old country tune, notes just slightly warped, like a cassette dragging. For the first time in hours, Earl heard laughter. Real laughter. His shoulders sagged. He rubbed his eyes. Maybe he had been hallucinating. Maybe exhaustion had driven him past the edge. He let out a shaky chuckle, muttering, "Guess I'm losing it. Coffee, hon?" The waitress stood by him, pot in hand, hair in a beehive bun, smile plastered wide. Her name tag read Lucy. Earl's throat tightened. Normal. This was normal. "Yeah, black," she poured. The liquid splashed dark and rich, steam curling upward. Earl wrapped his hands around the mug, savoring the heat, forcing himself to believe. Then he noticed her nails. Not chipped, not painted. Black. Black like soot. Black that swallowed the light. She winked. "First cup's on the house." He set the mug down slowly. Didn't drink. The voices around him seemed louder now. The laughter cracked, stretched. He glanced toward the families. A boy stirred syrup into his pancakes with a butter knife. His face was blank, his eyes milky white. Across the booth, his father's mouth moved. Not words, just chewing. But Earl heard it in his head, louder than thought. "We never left. We never left. We never left." Earl stumbled backward, chair screeching. His heart thundered as every head in the diner turned toward him at once. Dozens of eyes. Empty, glassy, reflecting the fluorescent light. "Sit down." The waitress's voice was no longer warm. It dropped low, flat. "Don't make a scene." Earl shook his head violently. No, you're not. This isn't." The jukebox clicked. The music stopped. In the silence, the woman's voice filled the diner. "You're already here, Earl." He spun. She stood at the counter, hands folded neatly, that same patient smile carved into her face. "We've been waiting." His mouth worked, but the words came strangled. "What do you want?" Her head tilted. Her lips twitched. For the first time, her voice matched perfectly. "To keep you." The lights flickered, the booths emptied in an instant. One blink, and all the patrons were gone. Plates of food half-eaten, coffee still steaming, a fork clattering to the floor. Earl stood alone with her. The shadows along the walls pulsed, swelling outward like lungs. The smell of rot curled through the air, sharp and wet. The woman stepped closer. Each footfall echoed too long, stretching seconds into minutes. "You've seen the road," she said. "You've heard us. You know there's no leaving." Earl backed into the counter, breath ragged. "You're not real." Her smile widened. "Then why are you shaking?" The jukebox flared back on. Not music this time, screams. Dozens of them layered shrill, drowning the diner. The sound poured into Earl's skull, vibrating his bones. He clapped his hands over his ears. "Stop! God, please stop!" The lights died. Total blackness. Then, the hiss of the coffee pot. The clink of a spoon. The scrape of boots on tile. When the lights returned, the booths were full again. But it wasn't strangers anymore. It was Earl. Dozens of him. Every booth, every stool, every shadow held another Earl, drinking, eating, staring blankly with glassy eyes. Some were older, some younger. All wore his face. One looked up from his plate and spoke in Earl's own voice. "You never left." Another echoed it, lips dripping syrup. "You never left." They all spoke, one after another, until the diner roared with his voice layered 100 times. "You never left." Earl fell to his knees, clutching his skull. His vision fractured, edges of reality bending. The woman crouched in front of him, her face inches from his. "You belong to the highway now." She pressed her hand against his chest. Ice spread through his ribs, down his veins, freezing him in place. Earl screamed, but it wasn't his voice, it was the radio. The diner dissolved. Lights collapsed into headlights. Screams twisted into static. The smell of grease faded into diesel fumes. Earl sat in the cab of his truck, hands locked to the wheel. His eyes stared into the mirror, wide and hollow. In the reflection, he saw the woman sitting in his passenger seat, smiling. the radio crackled with his own voice. Don't stop. The highway stretched on, endless. No clocks, no stars, no dawn. Only asphalt black and shimmering. Earl drove because that's all he could do. Behind him, faint in the static, other voices whispered. Dozens. Hundreds. All the others who never stopped at night. All the others who never left. Morning came to Highway 47 without ceremony. Sunlight spread across the blacktop, washing the night away in pale gold. The road looked ordinary again. Cracked pavement, weeds clawing through the shoulders, billboards peeling into white bones. A state trooper's cruiser idled on the side of the highway, its lights spinning lazily. Another officer leaned against the hood, notebook open, eyes squinting against the light. The truck stood 100 yards down, engine off, door hanging open. Keys still in the ignition. No driver. The troopers moved through the cab, their boots crunching on spilled coffee grounds and candy wrappers. A jacket slumped on the seat. A pair of boots rested on the floor mat, as if the owner had stepped right out of them. Radios still warm. One muttered, tapping the CB mic. Could have sworn I heard chatter when we pulled up. His partner flipped the log sheet clipped to the dash. Deliveries scheduled, times listed, everything neat. A life perfectly ordinary, suddenly broken off mid-sentence. Another one, the younger trooper said. His voice was flat, tired. How many does that make this year? The older man snapped his notebook shut. Too many. They didn't linger. They never did. They called the tow, filed the report, and drove off without looking back. At the diner 30 miles east, the talk had already begun. Truckers hunched in booths. Cigarettes burning low, mugs of coffee untouched. Guy from Memphis this time. Earl Mathers. Known him years. Solid driver. Wouldn't just walk off. You think it's the stretch past mile marker 90? It's always past 90. Voices dropped lower. Someone muttered about screams in the wind. Another swore he'd seen a woman waving in the dark weeks ago but had kept driving. A third man just stared at the counter, knuckles white, whispering, "Don't stop. Don't ever stop." The waitress pretended not to hear. She poured coffee, wiped tables, rang orders. But her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. By nightfall, the story had already grown. A trucker claimed he'd passed the same billboard 3 times in an hour. A family swore they saw headlights in their rear view that vanished the second they pulled over. On the CB, someone reported hearing Earl's voice, calm, steady, saying the same thing over and over. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. Days later, Earl's rig sat in the impound lot, dust gathering on the windshield. Mechanics popped the hood, tested the battery, checked the ignition. Everything worked. Perfectly fine, yet when they turned the key, the clock on the dash still read 12:17 a.m. weeks later. The whispers started again. A young driver on his first long haul heard them in his radio. Soft, layered, dozens of voices spilling over one another. He pulled over at a gas station, shaken, his face pale. When asked what they said, he struggled for words. Sounded like someone telling me not to stop. Same thing, over and over. But it was me, my own voice. The older truckers didn't laugh. They just nodded, eyes low. Highway 47 kept its silence. During the day, it was nothing but road and sky. At night, though, it remembered. The air seemed heavier past mile marker 90. Radios hissed with static. Headlights bent wrong, shadows stretched too long. And sometimes, if you drove past the old diner, you could swear you saw light glowing through the boarded windows. Warm, golden, welcoming. Inside, the booths weren't empty. Faces stared out from the shadows, their lips moving out of sync with their voices. Men, women, children, all whispering the same thing over and over. We never left. We never left. We never left. The curse didn't need to be understood. It didn't need explanation or history. It only needed time. The road had all the time in the world, and so it waited for the next driver who broke the rule. The next soul foolish enough to stop. One night, months later, a college kid drove the highway on his way back from visiting friends. Music blared from his speakers, windows down, the night air sharp against his face. When his fuel gauge blinked low, he pulled over near the diner. A woman stood outside, waving. Her hair clung to her cheeks. Her eyes gleamed like glass. "Please," she whispered. Though her lips didn't match the word, the kid hesitated. Just for a moment, and that was enough. The highway stretched on, endless, engines roared. Radios hissed. Shadows moved where shadows shouldn't. The road didn't care who you were, or where you came from, or why you stopped. It only cared that you did, and once you did, there was no leaving. Somewhere in the static, Earl's voice still rides the airwaves, calm, steady, inevitable. Don't stop. Don't ever stop.